The morning I came home from the hospital, my husband was not there. That sounds simple when I say it like that. Clean. Almost like a fact you'd read in a police report. But the truth of it, the full, ugly, suffocating truth, was so much worse than those 9 words can hold. Let me back up. My name is not important right now. What's important is that 6 days before that morning, I had been in a car accident on Route 9, coming back from my sister's baby shower in Connecticut. A distracted driver ran a red light. I don't remember the impact. I remember waking up in a hospital bed with my left leg in an external fixator, a tube in my arm, and a nurse named Felicia telling me, very gently, that my tibia had fractured in 2 places and I would need surgery. My husband. I'll call him by name because he's earned it. Kevin got the call while he was at a work happy hour in Midtown. He told me later he'd had 3 drinks by the time I reached him. He came to the hospital that first night. He stayed for 2 hours. He rubbed my hand and said, "You're going to be okay, babe," in a voice that sounded more like he was reminding himself than reassuring me. Then he kissed my forehead and said he had an early meeting. He had an early meeting. I was in the hospital for 18 days. He visited 4 times. The first week, I told myself he was overwhelmed. Kevin had never handled medical situations well. When his dad had a minor cardiac scare 2 years ago, Kevin went completely silent for days, just shut down, couldn't talk about it. I knew he wasn't built for hospitals. I knew the sight of the fixator on my leg made him pale. I extended every grace I had. The second week, I started to notice things. He would call at odd hours, 9 in the morning on a Tuesday when he was supposed to be in his office, 11 at night when he was supposedly working late. The calls were short. He sounded distracted. When I asked what was happening at home, he said, "Everything's fine. Don't stress yourself." When I asked if he was eating okay, he laughed a little and said, "You know me." When I asked if he could bring me my good robe from the closet, the dark blue waffle knit one my brother had gotten me for Christmas, he said he'd try to remember. He never brought it. My mother drove up from Virginia and stayed with me for 11 days. She slept in the chair next to my bed and washed my hair in the hospital sink and brought me Vietnamese takeout in a cooler bag because she knows the hospital food makes me miserable. She is 71 years old and she drove 4 hours alone and never once made me feel like a burden. Kevin met her in the hallway once, on day 9, and they exchanged pleasantries for about 4 minutes. He told her he was holding down the fort. She smiled at him with the specific smile she reserves for people she does not trust and said, "Of course you are." I was discharged on a Thursday. The surgeon had walked me through everything. Partial weight-bearing only. Crutches for 6 weeks. Physical therapy 3 times a week starting in 2 weeks. No stairs without a railing. No driving. The discharge nurse went over the care instructions with me twice and called my husband's number to make sure someone was coming to pick me up. Kevin didn't answer. She tried twice. Then she looked at me with an expression that was professionally neutral but had a softness underneath it, and she asked if there was someone else she could call. I called my brother. Owen answered on the second ring. I heard him stand up from whatever he was sitting in. That specific sound of someone moving fast. I said, "Hey, I need a ride." And he said, "Already in the car." Owen is 38. He runs a commercial real estate firm that he built from scratch in 11 years. He is the kind of person who fixes things, quietly and completely, without announcing that he fixed them. He is also the kind of person who, when something is wrong, becomes very still and very focused, like a room that has been cleared of all unnecessary furniture. He picked me up from the hospital with a wheelchair I hadn't asked for, and a coffee from the place I like, and a duffel bag with my good robe in it because he had called my mother and asked her what I needed. On the drive home, he didn't ask about Kevin. He asked about my leg. He asked what the physical therapy schedule looked like. He asked if I needed him to rearrange the guest room so I could sleep on the ground floor. I said no, the bedroom was fine, there was a railing. He nodded. When we pulled up to the building and he helped me out of the car and into the lobby, I could hear it from the elevator. Music. Not loud, but audible. And voices. Multiple voices. The specific ambient noise of people who are comfortable, people who are settled in. People who have been somewhere for a while. I looked at Owen, he looked at me. He didn't say anything. He pressed the button for the 7th floor. When he opened the door, I had given him my key because I couldn't manage it on crutches. There were 5 people in my living room. Kevin was on the couch with 2 guys from his college days, a couple I recognized vaguely from a work event last year, and a woman I had never seen before. There were bottles on the coffee table. There were takeout containers. There was a blanket that belonged to my grandmother, folded over the arm of the couch, and someone had set a beer on the side table we had gotten at an estate sale in Hudson, the one I had specifically asked everyone to use a coaster on. Kevin looked up. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, I saw something cross his face that I can only describe as inconvenience. Not surprise, not guilt. Inconvenience. Like I had walked into a meeting he hadn't scheduled me for. "Hey," he said. "You're home early." I hadn't moved from the doorway. "The discharge was at noon," I said. "I called you at 11:45. "I must have missed it," he said, already recalibrating, already shifting into the version of himself that smooths things over. He stood up. "Guys, this is my wife. She just got out of the hospital." He said it the way you announce a fun fact, a casual aside. The woman I didn't recognize said, "Oh wow, hope you're feeling better," in a bright, chirpy voice. She was wearing a silk top. She had her shoes off. She was sitting in the chair I sit in. Owen stepped inside. He set my bag down by the door. He looked at the room slowly, the way he looks at a property he's assessing, taking inventory, noting every detail, assigning value or lack thereof. Then he looked at Kevin. "Can I talk to you in the kitchen?" he said. It was not a question. Kevin glanced at his friends, did a small performative shrug, and followed Owen into the kitchen. I stood in the doorway on my crutches for a moment, and then the woman who was sitting in my chair said brightly, "Do you want to sit down?" Gesturing toward my own couch as though she were offering me something from her home. "I think it's time for everyone to head out," I said. To their credit, 3 of the 5 got up immediately. The couple I didn't know well started gathering their things without argument. One of Kevin's college friends, a tall guy named Todd or Tim, I could never remember, said, Yeah, of course," and started looking for his jacket. The other one, the one I had always liked least, stayed seated for a moment too long, which told me everything I needed to know about how much time he'd been spending in my apartment while I was absent. I went to the bedroom. I didn't have the energy for any of it. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room and tried to figure out what exactly I was feeling. Because it wasn't sadness and it wasn't anger yet, it was something flatter and colder than either of those. The sheets had not been changed since I'd left. I know that's a strange detail to get stuck on, but I had been in a hospital for 18 days. I had been in a bed with scratchy institutional sheets and thin pillows. I had thought about my own bed more times than I could count. The thread count, the specific weight of our duvet, the way the morning light came through the curtain gap on the left side, and the sheets hadn't been changed. They were still the ones I'd slept in the night before the accident. I heard Owen's voice in the kitchen, low and even. I couldn't make out words. I heard Kevin start to say something and then stop. When Owen came to the bedroom doorway 15 minutes later, after the apartment had gone quiet, he leaned against the frame and looked at me for a moment. "Do you want to know what I found out?" he said. "Or do you want to not know tonight?" I looked at him. "Tell me." He pulled a chair over from the corner. The reading chair, the one nobody ever actually sits in. And he sat in it facing me. And he talked for a long time. While I was in the hospital, Kevin had taken 17 days off work. Not because he was managing the household or handling insurance calls or dealing with the mountain of medical paperwork that had accumulated. He had taken 17 days off because a woman named Adrian, the woman in the silk top, the one in my chair, had been in town from her job in Austin, and Kevin had apparently decided that my absence was an opportunity. Owen knew this not because he had gone looking. He knew it because 2 days after my accident, when he had called Kevin to talk about coordinating care for me, Kevin had been evasive in a specific way that Owen recognized. Owen runs negotiations for a living. He knows what evasion sounds like. so he had quietly, without telling me, started paying attention. He had talked to Kevin's office manager, a woman named Beverly, who had mentioned, neutrally and without apparent awareness of what she was revealing, that Kevin had seemed in great spirits over the past few weeks and had come in twice with restaurant reservations visible on his phone screen. He had talked to the building's front desk, where the overnight staff mentioned a woman who had been coming and going for the better part of 2 weeks. He had looked at a few things Kevin had left open on a shared laptop during one of his hospital visits, a laptop that had been mine originally, that I had handed off to Kevin when I upgraded, and on which Kevin had apparently never considered that I might have residual access to certain Since accounts. He did not tell me what he saw there. He didn't need to. The shape of it was clear enough. Kevin had spent the 18 days of my hospitalization living a parallel life in our apartment with another woman. I sat with that for a long time. Here is what I noticed. I was not as surprised as I should have been. That was the part that disturbed me most. Some part of me, the part that had been clocking the short phone calls and the missed visits and the performative concern, had already started drawing conclusions. It hadn't let itself finish. The shock wasn't the revelation. The shock was realizing how long I had been not letting myself finish that sentence. "Okay," I said. Owen looked at me. "Okay? I need to think," I said. "But first I need to sleep, and I need you to," I gestured vaguely at the sheets. He changed the sheets. He didn't make a production of it. He just did it, the way he does everything, efficiently and without commentary. He helped me get situated, propped my leg, got me water. At the door he paused. "Don't make any decisions tonight," he said. "Just sleep." I slept for 11 hours. In the morning, Kevin was asleep on the couch. I don't know if that was guilt or logistics. I made my way to the kitchen on my crutches, slowly, the way I had been doing everything for 18 days, measuring each movement, calculating the cost of it. I made coffee. I looked out the kitchen window at the building across the street, at the square of someone else's kitchen where a woman was making breakfast and a kid was sitting at a table with a bowl of cereal. An ordinary Thursday morning. Kevin appeared in the doorway at 8:15. He was wearing the gray sweatshirt he always slept in, and he looked rumpled and careful, the way a person looks when they're trying to read a room before they commit to an expression. "Hey," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Sit down," I said. He sat. I did not yell. I want to be clear about that, because I know the expectation. I know what drama requires. But I was exhausted, not just physically, in a deeper way, and I had spent 18 days in a hospital learning a very particular economy of energy. I was not going to spend what I had on volume. I told him I knew. Not everything. I didn't need to list it, but enough. I told him I knew who Adrian was. I told him I knew she had been in this apartment. I told him I knew he had taken time off work for a reason that had nothing to do with being my husband. He didn't deny it immediately, which was its own kind of answer. He did the thing people do where they try to calibrate how much the other person knows before deciding how much to confirm. He asked how I knew. I told him that didn't matter. Then he said, and I want to get this exactly right, because it was the sentence that closed a door I had been standing in the frame of for a long time. He said, "I was lonely too. You were just gone for so long." I was lonely too. I was in a hospital bed with a broken leg, and I was lonely too. I was in a hospital bed with a broken leg, and I was lonely too. I looked at him for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and I called Owen. He answered in one ring. I said, "I'm ready." He said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. This is the part where I need to tell you about Owen in full, because the shape of what happened next only makes sense if you understand who he is. Owen is not flashy. He does not move through the world like a person who wants to be seen. He drives a practical car and wears the same 4 blazers in rotation and brings a reusable mug to meetings. But he also owns a substantial portion of a commercial corridor in Brooklyn, has his name on 3 mixed-use developments in New Jersey, and has never in his adult life been in a room where he was not the most prepared person. He has a lawyer on retainer named Philippa who does not do family law but knows everyone who does. He has an accountant who has been with him since his first deal. He has a financial advisor who specifically handles asset protection. He had not been sitting still for 18 days. When he arrived that morning, he came with Philippa. She was small, maybe 55, with silver hair cut close to her head, and a roller bag she hadn't fully unpacked from a flight she'd taken the night before. She sat across from Kevin at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and she said, pleasantly, "Good morning. I'm going to explain some things to you, and I'd like you to listen completely before you respond." Kevin looked at me. I looked at my coffee. Philippa explained, in the measured tone of someone who has done this many times, that our apartment was in my name, that my name specifically was on the deed because it had been purchased 2 years before our wedding with a down payment that had come entirely from a family trust my grandmother had left me, and that the prenuptial agreement Kevin and I had signed, which he had not taken seriously at the time, because he had never taken it seriously, contained very specific language about separate property and what constituted it. She explained that because I had been incapacitated and he had been the de facto occupant of the property, there was a question of whether certain items had been removed, damaged, or compromised, and that she would need a full accounting. She explained that in the state of New York, while we sorted out the legal picture, Kevin was welcome to make arrangements to stay elsewhere, and that if he chose not to do so voluntarily, there were procedures. Kevin said, "You can't just kick me out." Philippa said, "That's actually a conversation for a different attorney. But I can tell you that I wouldn't wait too long to find one." He looked at me again. I think he was waiting for me to soften. I think, even then, he believed that the version of me that had always found a way to smooth things over, to absorb things, to extend grace, would show up. I had spent 4 years training him to expect her. She didn't come. I said, "You should probably call Todd, or whoever," and I picked up my crutches and went to the window. He was out within 48 hours. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. That's the thing about real life, it does not edit for pacing. I went to physical therapy 3 times a week. I filled out insurance forms. I had a very long, very specific conversation with my own attorney, a woman Owen found for me who specialized in this exact kind of case, who had an office in the Flatiron district and a handshake that made you feel immediately that things were going to be handled. I started building a paper trail that Philippa had advised me to start on day 1. I did not contact Kevin except through attorneys. My mother came back and stayed for another 2 weeks. She cooked things I had not eaten since childhood. She watched procedural dramas with me in the evenings and did not push me to talk about my feelings on a schedule I wasn't ready for. She said once, "Your grandmother would have liked Owen very much." I said I knew. We left it there. Owen came by every Sunday morning with bagels. He didn't make a big thing of it. He just came, and we ate, and he asked about my leg, and sometimes he helped me carry laundry or reach something I couldn't manage yet, and at no point did he say, "I told you so," or "I knew it," or any of the things he would have been entitled to say. He is not that kind of person. There is a woman in my physical therapy group. I go at 10 on Mondays and Wednesdays now, and there is a kind of loose community that forms around shared inconvenience, who asked me once, about 6 weeks in, how I was doing. Not in the reflexive way people ask, in the actual way. And I found myself saying, "Better than I thought, worse than I want." She nodded like that was a complete sentence. It was, actually. The divorce was filed 4 months after the discharge date. Kevin retained an attorney who sent a number of letters making claims about various assets that Philippa described, over the phone, as imaginative. The prenup held. The apartment stayed in my name. The portion of the joint account that had existed before our marriage was parsed carefully and returned appropriately. Kevin did not get what he had apparently assumed, in some back room of his own thinking, that he was entitled to. He sent me one personal message, through his attorney's email, that was technically a legal communication, but contained a paragraph in the middle that was not. In it, He said that he had made mistakes, but that I had made it impossible for him by being gone for so long, and that he hoped one day I would understand that he was human. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to my attorney and let her decide if it was relevant. She said it wasn't, legally. I said okay, he was human. That's true. Humans make choices. That's also true. The two facts coexist fine. They don't cancel each other out and they don't change anything. My leg healed. Not perfectly. The surgeon had told me there might be some weather sensitivity long-term, a minor change in gait on steep inclines, nothing life-altering. The fixator came off after 8 weeks, and I cried in the car afterward in a way I hadn't let myself cry the whole time, with my mom in the passenger seat handing me tissues and not saying anything at all, which was exactly right. I walked into my first post-surgery physical therapy session on my own 2 feet, slowly but without the crutches, and Felicia, the same nurse from the hospital, I kept seeing her at the rehab center, said, "Look at you." Just that. Look at you. And I thought, yes, look at you. And I thought, yes, look at me. I am 31 years old. I own my apartment. My brother brings me bagels on Sundays. I have a good robe. I am relearning how to trust the ground beneath me, literally and otherwise, and I am doing it in the particular way that I do things, which is quietly and incompletely and with a lot of pauses and then, eventually, all the way. There's something I want to say to anyone who recognizes any part of this, not the specific parts, not the hospital or the leg or the man on the couch, but the pattern of noticing things you don't let yourself finish noticing. The pattern of extending grace past the point where it's grace and into the territory where it's something else, where it's just the habit of not wanting to know. I know that pattern from the inside. I know how much energy it takes to maintain it. What I know now is that the moment I made the call, not to him, but to Owen, the person who would actually come, something shifted. Not all at once, not cleanly. But the direction changed. I had been in a hospital for 18 days, and I had been, in some sense, waiting for someone to pick me up for much longer than that. And when I finally called the right person, he was already in the car. That's the whole story. That's also, I think, the beginning of a different one. I used to think that the hardest part of what happened to me was the accident itself. The impact, I don't remember. The waking up, the tube in my arm, the nurse's voice telling me what was broken and how long it would take. But I was wrong. The hardest part was something much quieter than that. It was the moment I understood that I had spent years training myself not to finish certain thoughts, not to follow a feeling all the way to its conclusion. Kevin had been giving me evidence for a long time. The short calls, the missing visits, the way he looked at me when I came through the door like I was an interruption. I had collected all of it and then deliberately set it aside because finishing the thought meant doing something about it, and doing something about it meant the life I had built was not what I believed it to be. That is not weakness. I want to be clear about that. It is a very human thing to protect the version of your life that feels manageable. But there is a point where protection becomes a kind of slow damage, and I think the 18 days in that hospital bed were, in some way, the reckoning I had been postponing. I didn't choose it, but I had to live through it. And what I found on the other side was not what I expected. What I found was that I was more capable than I had allowed myself to be. The leg healed. The paperwork got done. The attorneys handled what needed handling. The prenup, the document Kevin had signed without taking seriously, because he had never taken anything I built seriously, held exactly the way it was designed to hold. Every choice I had made before the marriage, the careful ones, the ones that felt overly cautious at the time, turned out to matter. That is not luck. That is the quiet, unglamorous work of a person who, somewhere underneath the accommodation and the grace extending, had always known her own worth. Owen didn't save me. I want to say that clearly. He showed up, which is different. He changed the sheets and sat in the reading chair and brought Philippa and her legal pad and her legal pad and her roller bag. And he did all of it without making me feel like a rescue project. What he gave me was not rescue. It was the space, To make a clear decision in a moment when everything around me was designed to make clarity difficult. That is what the right people do. They don't carry you. They stand close enough that you can find your footing. Kevin told me he was lonely too. I think about that sentence sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of detached clarity. He made choices. They were his to make, and they cost him exactly what they should have cost him. Not because the universe arranges punishment, but because actions have weight and that weight lands somewhere eventually. He built something on a foundation he had never inspected, and when it was inspected, it did not hold. I am 31 years old and I walk with a slight difference on steep hills, and I own my apartment, and my brother brings bagels on Sundays. I did not get the life I planned. I got a clearer one. And I think that is, in its own unasked for way, the better deal.